The lunch bell rang like a sentence. For most kids, it was freedom. For Ariba, it was dread. She slowly packed her books into her worn-out backpack, careful not to make eye contact with anyone. Her stomach growled, but hunger was nothing compared to humiliation. She knew what was waiting in the cafeteria. Her shoes squeaked slightly as she stepped onto the cafeteria floor, which felt more like a stage than a place to eat. Laughter, gossip, and trays clattering. It was all background noise until she saw them. Sana, the leader of the school's most popular girls, always in expensive clothes, always flanked by her two shadows, Zoya and Mehak. They were already staring at her from across the room, grinning like wolves circling prey. Ariba's heart pounded. She turned, hoping to escape back into the hallway. Too late. Sana intercepted her with a smile so sweet it was poisonous. In her hand was a large paper cup filled with milk from the lunch line. Cold, full, waiting. "Hey, Ariba," Sana said, loudly drawing the attention of the nearby tables. "You forgot your milk." The sarcasm was clear. I don't want—" Ariba began, voice trembling. Sana didn't wait. She flipped the cup. The cold liquid poured down Ariba's head. Soaking her hair, her uniform, her book bag, the cafeteria erupted with laughter. Phones came out, someone even filmed. Another kid shouted, "Look, it's Cowgirl," and the insult echoed louder than anything else. Ariba didn't wait for more. She dropped her tray and ran, slipping slightly as she pushed open the door to the hallway. Her vision blurred, not from milk but from hot tears. She didn't stop running until she reached the back of the school building, behind the gymnasium where the dumpsters sat, and no one ever went. The smell was awful, but it didn't matter. She dropped to the ground, sobbing, hugging her knees, heart pounding so hard it hurt. She wanted to disappear. "Why me?" she whispered. "Why always me?" Her voice broke. She rocked back and forth, eyes shut tight, hoping the tears would drain away the shame. But when she opened her eyes, she wasn't alone. A few feet away, near the dumpsters, sat a dog. Not just any dog. A stray. He was medium-sized, with patchy brown fur, thin legs, ribs, showing under his belly, and one ear folded over as if it had been bitten long ago. His tail lay still, not wagging, not aggressive. Just there. He was watching her. Ariba sniffed and looked away, wiping her face with the sleeve of her soaked shirt. "What do you want?" she mumbled. The dog didn't move. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. Her heart still thudded from the run and the shame. Then, to her surprise, the dog stood up, not to bark or chase, but to slowly walk toward her. Step by cautious step. He stopped right next to her. Then he sat. Ariba blinked. She dared not move. His presence wasn't threatening. It was quiet, like comfort. His fur smelled like the streets, and he bore the marks of fights and hunger. But his eyes were soft. They weren't like the ones that laughed at her. They didn't judge. She looked at him and whispered, "You're not scared of me." The dog tilted his head. Something about the way he sat beside her, calm and silent, made her chest ache. Her shoulders slumped. She didn't feel strong. But for some reason, next to this scruffy, forgotten animal, she didn't feel invisible anymore. She dared to stretch out a trembling hand. The dog sniffed it, then licked the tip of her fingers. She gave a tiny laugh, wet, broken, but real. "Guess you know how it feels too, huh?" she said. The dog didn't answer, but he didn't leave either, and neither did she. The next morning, Ariba stood at the kitchen sink packing her school lunch. Like always. But today she added something extra. 2 slices of bread, folded around the last bit of leftover chicken from dinner. Not for her, for him. She didn't know why, but she couldn't stop thinking about the stray dog who had silently sat beside her the day before. His steady eyes, his quiet loyalty. He hadn't barked, he hadn't judged, he had simply been there, in a way no one else had. By lunch, Ariba didn't go to the cafeteria. She clutched the foil-wrapped sandwich in one hand and slipped out the UAO side door, avoiding the loud crowd and heading for the alley behind the gym. She wasn't sure he'd be there, but he was. The same scruffy, scarred dog was lying near the corner, his head resting on his paws. He looked up as she approached, ears twitching. "Hey, boy," she whispered, holding out the sandwich. "I brought you something." He stood and padded toward her, cautious but not afraid. He sniffed her hand and gently took the food from her palm. He didn't snatch it. He didn't growl. He ate like a gentleman, even though he looked half-starved. She smiled, then sat down on the ground beside him, her back against the warm brick wall. "You don't have a name," she said quietly. "That's not fair. Everyone deserves a name." The dog looked up at her with those same soulful eyes. "I'll call you Shadow," she said after a moment, "because you don't say anything, but you're there, like a shadow, like mine." From that day forward, Shadow became part of her life. Every lunch break she brought him scraps, sometimes from her lunch, sometimes from her family's fridge. She always made sure it was enough for him to eat, even if it meant she went without. Shadow was always there waiting, sometimes sitting, sometimes curled up in the corner, but he never barked, never jumped. He would sit beside her silently as she talked about school, her fears, her dreams, things she couldn't tell anyone else. At home, Ariba's parents were loving, but busy. Her mother worked long shifts at a tailoring shop, and her father juggled 2 part-time jobs. They didn't notice how quiet Ariba had become, how she'd stopped drawing, how her school grades were slipping. At school, the bullying continued, mostly in whispers and sneers now. Sana had moved on from milk to nastier things, spreading. Rumors about Ariba, mocking her worn-out shoes, sneering at her drawings. "She feeds dirty dogs in the alley," Zoya whispered loudly one day in the hallway. "Probably eats with them too." Ariba heard them. She always heard them. But something was changing. The old Ariba would have run and cried in the bathroom. But now she gritted her teeth and kept walking, because she knew that outside these walls, someone was waiting for her. Someone who didn't care about her clothes, her shoes, or her silence. Shadow. Somehow knowing she had him gave her strength. One afternoon, while she sat with him, she reached out and gently ran her fingers through his coarse fur. He flinched. At first, his body stiffened, breath held, but when he realized she meant no harm, he relaxed and leaned into her touch. She looked at the scars on his ears, the patchy spots on his back. "Someone hurt you too, didn't they?" she whispered. He didn't respond, but she felt it, the bond, the silent understanding between 2 souls the world had thrown away. That night, Ariba sat at her desk and opened her sketchbook for the first time in months. She began to draw, not the sunset, not a mountain, not the things her art teacher always asked for. She drew Shadow sitting beside her, calm and strong. It had been 3 weeks since Ariba first met Shadow. 3 weeks of skipped lunches, hidden bread, whispered conversations with a dog who never interrupted. The bruises on her confidence were still there, but they didn't sting as much anymore. She had stopped crying in bed at night. Her sketchbook was filling again, mostly with drawings of Shadow in various poses, sitting, walking, curled up beside her feet. But Sana hadn't forgotten her. If anything, Ariba's silence seemed to irritate her more. The bullies no longer got the reaction they craved. Ariba didn't break down when they called her filthy dog girl or whispered that she smelled like garbage. She just walked away. One cloudy Tuesday, Ariba stayed behind in the art room after class to finish a drawing for the upcoming school competition. She didn't notice the time until the hallways were almost empty. She hurried out with her bag and portfolio, hoping to make it home before the rain. That's when she saw them. Sana, Zoya, Mehak, waiting near the side of the building, blocking the alley she always used to exit quietly. "Going to feed your street?" "Rat again," Sana sneered, stepping forward. Ariba's stomach twisted. Her grip on her sketchbook tightened. She tried to walk past, but Zoya stepped in front of her. "You think you're better than us now?" Mehak said. "Just because you draw dogs and act like a little charity case. Just let me go," Ariba muttered, trying to keep her voice calm. But Sana wasn't listening. She reached into a fast food bag and pulled out a greasy pile of cold fries, mashed burger bits, and ketchup-drenched wrappers. "Let's give your pet a treat," she said with a wicked grin. "Or better, let's give you one." Before Ariba could react, Sana raised the bag, aiming it straight at her head. A low, dangerous growl pierced the air. The girls froze. From the far end of the alley, Shadow emerged, his eyes sharp, ears pinned back. He walked forward slowly, his head low, lips curled just enough to show a warning. Sana backed up slightly. What the? Shadow growled again, deeper this time. He positioned himself in front of Ariba, shielding her with his thin but firm body. His stance was unmistakable. One step closer and he would protect her with everything he had. Zoya yelped, dropping her phone. Mehak stumbled backward. "He's going to bite us!" Mehak shrieked. "Run!" Sana hissed. The three girls turned and fled, tripping over each other as they disappeared around the corner. The crumpled food bag dropped to the ground, its contents spilling across the concrete. Ariba stood frozen, heart pounding. Shadow turned to her, his tail slowly wagging. Now. He nudged her hand with his nose, checking if she was okay. She dropped to her knees, wrapping her arms around his neck. You protected me," she whispered, breathless. She buried her face in his fur, trembling. Not out of fear this time, but out of overwhelming emotion. Nobody had ever stood up for her like that. No teacher, no student, just a stray dog. Shadow licked her cheek gently, then sat beside her like always, as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't just faced down three teenagers with nothing but loyalty and instinct. Ariba exhaled slowly and looked down at her sketchbook, which had fallen during Huai. The chaos. She picked it up, brushing off the dirt. The drawing on the front page was of Shadow standing tall. Now it felt like a prophecy. The next morning, the school halls buzzed with new whispers. Sana had a scratch on her wrist. Mehak claimed she'd nearly been bitten. Zoya dramatically told everyone she barely escaped with her life. Their version of the story was simple. A wild street dog had lunged at them after school. They left out why he'd appeared, or what they had been doing before it happened. Of course, no one questioned them. They were popular, believable. By second period, the principal made an announcement over the intercom. A stray animal was reported near the school premises yesterday. For the safety of students, we have contacted the City Animal Control Unit. They will remove the dog this weekend. Ariba felt her stomach twist. Remove him? She stared at the loudspeaker, numb. A world that had ignored her was suddenly acting, fast, when it was convenient, when someone else gave them a reason they were going to take Shadow away. Her pencil broke in her hand. She couldn't focus. Her drawings turned to scribbles. She didn't eat lunch, and when the final bell rang, she didn't even go see him. Not because she didn't want to, but because she didn't know how to say goodbye. That night she barely touched her dinner. Her father finally noticed. "You all right, Betty?" he asked, sitting beside her. Ariba hesitated. She'd never told him about the bullying, or the dog, or how badly she needed Shadow in her life. But the lump in her throat wouldn't let her lie. She nodded quickly and excused herself to her room. The tears came the moment she closed the door. She sat on her bed, hugging her knees, rocking slightly. She had lost so much already, her dignity, her confidence, her peace. She couldn't lose Shadow too. He was the only soul in the world who had stood up for her, the only one who'd seen her when everyone else turned away. She looked around her room, eyes landing on her sketchbook. Slowly, she picked it up and flipped through the pages, page after page of Shadow, brave, loyal, watching her. Guarding her, one image caught her attention. It was the sketch she had drawn after the milk incident, Shadow sitting beside her while tears dripped from her chin. She had drawn his eyes carefully, full of quiet strength. Ariba opened her laptop. She scanned the sketch and uploaded it. Then, hands trembling, she wrote, "Everyone laughed when they dumped milk on me and I cried. No one came to help, except a stray dog. His name is Shadow. He's been my friend, my protector, and the only soul who didn't turn away. Now they're calling animal control to take him. Please, someone help me save him." She didn't expect anything, but something deep inside her needed to speak. For even if no one listened, she clicked post and went to sleep with her sketchbook in her arms. Morning came early. Ariba rolled over, half hoping it had all been a bad dream, but as her phone buzzed non-stop on her nightstand, she rubbed her eyes and picked it up. 7 notifications. Her post had gone viral. Comments flooded in. "This broke me. We need to help her. Where is this dog? Let's get him adopted. She's braver than most adults I know. local pages began sharing it. A popular animal rescue Instagram reposted her sketch. Someone started a hashtag, Save Shadow. By noon, people were calling the school. Emails poured in. A local news outlet requested an interview. The principal, who had barely remembered Ariba's name before, called her to the office. "You know this post has drawn attention to the school," he said stiffly. Ariba stood tall, holding her sketchbook in her arms. "Good," she replied. "Maybe now someone will finally listen." By the end of that week, Ariba wasn't invisible anymore. For the first time in years, people said her name with respect. Teachers she barely spoke to stopped her in the halls to ask how she was doing. Students who had mocked her drawings before now stared at her sketches of Shadow like they were gold. But it wasn't about popularity. Ariba didn't care about attention. She just wanted to keep Shadow safe. The local newspaper ran a piece titled, "Brave Girl and Her Guardian Dog, the easy stray who protected a bullying victim." The article featured one of her pencil sketches right on the front page. Online news channels called her for interviews. She was nervous, stuttering on camera at times, but she always said one thing clearly. "He didn't bark, he didn't bite. He just stood between me and the people who hurt me, and for once someone saw me." People started visiting the alley beside the gym. Some left food, others came just to see Shadow in person. But Shadow never wandered too far. He stayed hidden when too many people came. He would only step out when he heard her voice. Ariba still visited him every day. And she noticed something strange. Shadow was walking slower, breathing heavier. His energy wasn't the same. "Are you okay, boy?" she whispered, kneeling beside him. His tail thumped softly, but he didn't lift his head like before. She sat beside him, heart sinking. His ribs still showed too much. The gentle strength in his eyes was fading. That night she told her parents everything, about the bullying, the milk, the alley, the dog, the posts, the crowd of strangers asking to adopt him. Her father listened. Jaw tight, her mother wiped her eyes. "We didn't know," her mother said softly. "We didn't see." "It's not your fault," Ariba whispered. "No one did." The next morning, her father made a phone call. By evening, a vet arrived. At the alley in a small white van. Ariba was terrified. She stood by Shadow, hands gripping his fur. "They're not taking you away," she whispered. "They're just going to help." The vet crouched down slowly, gently checking Shadow's legs, eyes, heartbeat. Shadow didn't resist, though his eyes stayed locked on Ariba. "He's malnourished," the vet said kindly, "and he's older than he looks. But he's loyal, and he's been trying to protect her with what little strength he has left." Ariba swallowed a lump in her throat. "He needs shelter, medicine, and proper food," the vet added. "If you want, I can take him to the clinic. He'll come back stronger." Ariba nodded slowly, though her heart cracked. "Only if I can. See him again." "You will," the vet promised. "He'll be under our care, but he belongs to you now, if that's what you want." She looked at Shadow, who was now resting his head on her shoe, and whispered, "Yes, I want that." Shadow was gently lifted onto a stretcher, and Ariba stayed by his side until the van door closed. She stood in the alley long after the van disappeared from sight. Later that night, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a different kind of message. "Hey, I saw your post. What Sana and the others did, it wasn't okay. I should have said something before. I'm sorry." It was from one of her classmates, someone who had laughed with the others once. Other messages followed, quiet apologies, small acknowledgements, people who had seen but stayed silent. The next day, her principal announced a new anti-bullying initiative. The school held a kindness week, featuring Ariba's artwork on the posters. But to her, it wasn't about kindness week or interviews. It was about the dog who gave her the courage to stand up, the one who didn't speak but changed everything, and now she waited for the day he'd return. Every evening, Ariba would sit by the alley wall where she had first met Shadow, sketchbook in hand, waiting. She drew him from memory, each page capturing his noble eyes, his protective stance, the way he used to rest his head on her lap without a word. The vet had promised to keep her updated, and he did. Shadow was improving slowly. He was eating, receiving medication, and recovering from exhaustion and past injuries. But Ariba missed him more than she could explain. Every corner of her life felt quieter without his silent presence. She no longer flinched when she walked into school, but something still felt incomplete, like her shield was gone, like her shadow had left her too soon. Then one afternoon something unusual happened. While she was sitting on the school lawn, flipping through her drawings, she noticed someone standing near the entrance gate, a middle-aged woman in a blue coat holding a leash. Her heart skipped. Shadow. He looked cleaner now, his fur brushed, the patchy spots slowly healing. His ribs weren't as sharp. He stood a little straighter, but his face, his eyes were exactly the same. "Shadow!" Ariba cried out, jumping to her feet. The dog's ears perked, and in a heartbeat he bolted from the woman's side, leash still trailing, sprinting, straight toward her. He didn't bark or leap. He simply ran until he reached her, pressing his head into her legs as though he'd never left. She dropped to her knees, burying her face in his fur, tears running freely. The woman in the coat walked over, smiling gently. He remembered the school gates. We figured it was time to let him visit. Ariba looked up, wiping her eyes. "Thank you for everything." "He still has a few weeks of care left," the woman said, crouching beside them. "But the vet said visits would help. Emotionally, he's been restless without you, without—" Ariba looked at Shadow, who was now sitting calmly beside her, just like old times. The bell rang and students began pouring out of the building. Some stopped, others stared. Zoya stood frozen, her mouth half open. Sana was with her, but for once she didn't smirk, didn't say a word. Ariba stood slowly, placing a hand on Shadow's back. Whispers rippled across the yard. A few kids clapped. Some pulled out their phones to snap pictures, but Ariba didn't care about any of it. Not the attention, not the stares. All she cared about was that her friend was back. She walked with Shadow toward the main road, the vet, assistant strolling quietly behind them. Shadow didn't need a leash. He stayed by her side as if guided by something deeper than training, as if tied to her by something invisible and unbreakable. The next few days turned into a new routine. Shadow would visit the school gates for short periods, sometimes sitting beside her during lunch under a shady tree just beyond the playground fence. Students came up, some curious, some awkward, a few even asking to pet him. Ariba let them, but Shadow always leaned closest to her. Sana kept her distance, but one day, as Ariba packed her things, she noticed a folded note tucked inside her. Sketchbook, no name, just a few words scribbled in shaky handwriting. "You're braver than all of us, I'm sorry." Ariba stared at the note for a long time, unsure how to feel, but she folded it carefully and placed it inside the same page where she'd drawn Shadow standing in front of her, shielding her from the world. What neither she nor Shadow knew yet was that something bigger was coming, because while one chapter was healing, another was quietly beginning, one that would push them both into the center of something much larger than either of them ever expected. By the following week, Ariba's world was moving faster than she could keep up. What started as a single post had evolved into a national movement. A popular news anchor picked up her story and aired a special segment titled "The Stray Who Protected a Silent Girl." Within days, the video crossed 1 million views. Shadow, still recovering at the clinic, had become a symbol of loyalty, courage, and silent rebellion against cruelty. Her inbox overflowed. Messages from strangers, schools, artists, activists, even one from a well-known children's book publisher who wanted to turn her story into a picture book. Ariba didn't know what to do with all of it. She still walked the same school halls, sat in the same classrooms, but now even teachers treated her like someone important. She was asked to give a speech at the upcoming school assembly for Kindness Week's closing ceremony. She wanted to say no. Her voice still trembled in front of crowds. But when she looked at the drawing of Shadow guarding her, folded in the back of her notebook, she knew what he'd want her to do: speak. So she said yes. The morning of the assembly arrived cloudy and tense. The auditorium was packed. Students filled every row, murmuring and fidgeting while Ariba stood backstage, holding her sketchbook like armor. Her heart pounded in her chest. She could hear the principal speaking. And now, a student whose courage has inspired not just our school, but people across the country. Please welcome Ariba Khan. The applause was loud, but she didn't hear it. All she could hear was her breath. Her feet moved like they didn't belong to her. She stepped onto the stage, eyes scanning the sea of faces. At the very back, through the auditorium's open double doors, she saw him. Shadow. Sitting quietly just outside the doorway beside the vet assistant, his gaze locked on her, her lungs expanded. Her fingers stopped trembling. She walked to the podium and flipped open her sketchbook. I used to be invisible, she began, voice low but steady. People saw me, but they didn't really see me. The crowd hushed. I used to cry in a silence while others laughed. I thought I didn't matter. Until one day someone who had nothing, no home, no voice, no name, did something no one else did. She turned the sketchbook to show the audience a drawing of Shadow standing tall, between her and three dark silhouettes. He stood in front of me. He didn't bark or growl, he just stood. And for the first time I realized I deserved to be protected. Ariba paused, her voice thick with emotion. This isn't a story about a dog. It's about kindness, loyalty, and what happens when one soul, even a stray one, refuses to walk away from someone in pain. The silence was absolute. Then came the applause, not polite, not scattered, loud, roaring, a standing ovation. Ariba stepped back, overwhelmed, but her eyes searched only for Shadow, still there, still watching. His tail wagged once. When she walked, half-stage, the vice principal approached her. "There's someone here to meet you," he said with a smile. Behind him stood a man in a grey coat and glasses. He introduced himself as an agent from a National Animal Welfare Foundation. "We saw your speech. Your story is powerful," he said, "and we're launching a new campaign for rescued animals. We'd like you to be our youth ambassador, and Shadow as our campaign mascot." Ariba blinked. "Me? You've already changed lives," he said. "Let's help you change even more." For a moment she was speechless. Then she smiled. Not the quiet smile she used to give when she wanted to disappear, a real one that belonged to someone no longer afraid to be seen. The weeks that followed felt like a whirlwind. Ariba and Shadow became inseparable faces in the campaign, promoting kindness to animals and people alike. School visits, TV interviews, community events. It was a schedule so packed, it was hard to believe it all began with spilled milk and tears in a forgotten alley. Shadow was no longer the stray dog with matted fur and wary eyes. With proper care and love, he blossomed into a gentle, dignified companion. His tail wagged more often, and his eyes sparkled with newfound warmth. The scar of neglect didn't vanish, but it was softened by every pat, every meal, every whispered word from Ariba. One crisp autumn morning, Ariba stood on a small stage in front of hundreds gathered at the city park. The banner above read, "Shadow's Second Chance, a celebration of courage and compassion." The event was a fundraiser to support stray animals and anti-bullying initiatives in schools. As she spoke, Ariba's voice no longer quivered. It carried strength, wisdom beyond her years. "Shadow showed me that even when the world turns its back, kindness can find a way, not just from people, but from unexpected places, unexpected friends." The crowd cheered. After the speech, a group of children surrounded her, holding their own drawings of dogs and stories of their struggles. She knelt down to each, sharing smiles and encouragement. Later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Shadow trotted beside her, tongue lolling happily. Her father, standing nearby, placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You've grown so much," he said softly. Ariba smiled. "I think Shadow grew too." He barked softly as if to agree. That evening at home, Ariba's mother framed the very first sketch of Shadow, him sitting beside her as she cried after the milk was dumped, the one that had touched so many hearts. "It's a reminder," her mother said, "of how far you've both come." Ariba ran her fingers over the glass. "Not just me," she said. "It's about standing up even when no one else will, about friendship, about hope." Her phone buzzed with a message from the animal shelter. "Shadow is officially ready for adoption, but we know he's already found his forever home, with you." She chuckled softly. No paperwork needed, no signatures, just a bond unspoken but unbreakable. Days later, Ariba and Shadow visited the alley once more, the place where their story began. She knelt down, placing a fresh bowl of water and some treats. Near the corner, Shadow sniffed, then looked up at her, tail wagging. "Thank you for choosing me," she whispered. He nuzzled her hand, his eyes full of quiet gratitude. As they walked away, the alley seemed less lonely, less forgotten, because they had changed it, because they had changed each other, and in a world that often felt cold and harsh, they had found warmth, where no one expected it. The end.